Hi, this is Mariah Gullo from The Hollywood Reporter, and we're in studio with Joe Wright today, director of Darkest Hour. Hi, Joe.
Hello, hello.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm all right. I'm excited. We've got the premiere tonight, so I'm excited.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to talk about this movie. I saw it. It's amazing. Of course, the elephant in the room is Gary Oldman. That's no pun on him. Please tell me when did you start kind of envisioning Gary Oldman for this role?
Fairly soon, to be honest with you. I read the script back in January 2016, and I was fascinated by this character, regardless of the fact that he was, Winston Churchill. This character's journey, and I felt the character had this kind of manic intensity, this brain that wouldn't stop working. And Gary is someone I've always wanted to work with, and it felt that it seemed that he might have the kind of that level of intensity and energy that I was looking for, and so we approached him, and after a little cajoling, he said yes. He
was hesitant to play the role.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big thing for him to take on, and obviously a very big transformation for him. So that was frightening, But we began work with a prosthetics makeup designer called Kazuhiro, and who's a bit of a kind of extraordinary magician genius, and quite quickly it became apparent that Kazu was going to be able to do something very, very special, which would allow Gary the freedom to give the performance that he does.
Mm-hmm. And Gary also studied Churchill directly from Churchill, from reels, and not from past performances of Churchill.
No, I think the important thing for Gary and also for myself was to kind of clear our minds of any versions that had been done before, and really try and go back to the source. Gary is an actor who spends like 4 months preparing for a role at least, and by which I mean that every day he was in his studio out back and practicing and rehearsing, and he would send me recordings of what he was doing, and I would give small notes, and so there's a long process for Gary. It's a very much a labour of love.
Mm-hmm. Why was this a story that was important for you to tell?
Well, back in 2016 when I took it on, Brexit hadn't happened, the American elections hadn't happened, the French elections hadn't happened, so it was a very different world. And what I was interested in doing was telling the story of this character who suffered this extraordinary moment of doubt, which he then overcame, turned into something positive, and basically kind of saved the world. So I was interested in the story of the character. Then, as we went into production and start, developing the film further, all these other events, global political events, started happening, and sort of for us, Brexit, most importantly, probably, and so it took on a kind of topicality that we never envisaged for it.
You said about Churchill that his flaws were his greatest attributes.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's often true of people. He had this incredible will, and it was that willpower that pushed him to see through the disastrous Gallipoli campaign in the First World War, when thousands of people were killed. But it's also that willpower that meant he resisted the wave of tyranny, of bigotry, of Nazism that was sweeping across Britain at the time. And he really stood up to Hitler against all odds, and against the advice of a lot of his own party and his cabinet.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to see kind of the opposition side talking about peace talks and negotiations, and it's you know, you think to yourself, well, what would be wrong with negotiations? And then you realize, well, it's Hitler.
Yeah, exactly.
Churchill is a kind of a hawkish figure, but
in that context.
yeah.
And I think that, you know, personally, I'd probably be more of a dove in most contexts. Certainly in recent wars, I might well have been, and I might well have sided with Chamberlain and Halifax in that situation. But Churchill was proved right, and history did that. So, you know, there's something there's some fate at play there as well.
What were some of the lessons of World War II that you think are fading out of consciousness just because of the generations turning over?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a element of kind of what in Britain used to be called make, do and mend, which was to kind of recycle stuff and you know, nowadays we have like too much stuff in a way, but I think one could say that there is a kind of belief in principles, political principles, the survival of the weakest was a kind of mandate for a lot of people, but I don't know if that's true. You know, I look around me and I see amazing levels of resistance these days. I think the times in which we're living are probably the best they have ever been. And that, yeah, there are setbacks. We take a step backwards, you know, sometimes, but we're always, I hope, moving forward.
Can you talk to me a little bit about working with Kristen Scott Thomas and her scenes with Gary Oldman?
I was determined that Kristen should play this role. I've been a huge fan of Kristen for many years, and I was determined that she'd play it, and at first she declined the role, so I said, listen, will you meet me? I'll come to Paris where she lived. I'll come to Paris and I'll meet you wherever you want. And so we met at the Café de Flore in Saint-Germain, and she was, she was hesitant about taking on such a kind of iconic figure, especially for Britain. But then slowly one was able to kind of impress upon her the importance of her accepting this role, and finally won her over. I love Kristen.
She is quite lovely and so delicate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. She's pretty tough too.
Yeah, she is. Is there a scene in the movie that really sticks out to you as being particularly challenging? One that you worked on with your...
Yeah, I mean, I think, the challenge really was that for such a, it's a very dialogue-heavy movie. There's a scene, for instance, which is 17 men sat around a table discussing strategy, and for 10 pages, So the challenge for me was to find a way of creating as much suspense, as much drama as possible, and I really envisaged the movie as a kind of political thriller, and found a way of keeping that kind of clock ticking and those stakes high, and engaging the audience in a debate on an intellectual and also on an emotional level, and making sure that at one point they think that Halifax is right and the next point they think that Churchill is right, and so creating that tension was really the challenge of the film.
I noticed a lot of kind of like beautiful repetition of closing doors, ticking clocks, and fluttering paper.
Yeah. All of that stuff is about kind of trying to create a kind of syncopated rhythm that pulls the audience through.
And humor is also very important for you, like with your period pieces. How do you create, like you have the written word, but then you also have comedic timing and beats. How do you kind of create your beats and scenes for this
I guess I just kind of feel them. I mean, I think the English are quite funny anyway. I think their kind of awkwardness is something that always sort of strikes me as being funny. The scene, for instance, where Churchill first meets King George, played by Ben Mendelsohn, the kind of strange, like, blind date of it, and the kind of not quite sure what the etiquette is, the kiss of the hand that is kind of wet and unappealing. All of those details, really, in human interaction. I love drama because it allows me to really investigate how we relate to each other, or more often than not, don't relate to each other, disconnect, miss each other. And I think there's humour and pathos to be had in those experiences.
Mm-hmm. You have a companion movie to your movie, Dunkirk. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me tell me about the evolution of learning of Dunkirk and then having Dunkirk open, and just kind of how it kind of beautifully came together with your...
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, when we were already in production when I heard that Nolan was doing Dunkirk, and I was worried. I wondered who might be playing Churchill, but soon discovered that no one was playing Churchill. He wasn't in the movie, so that was a big relief. And then I kind of put it out of my mind. I kind of, I try hard not to compare myself to others, and to just focus on what I'm doing, and hopefully it will turn out okay. Then Dunkirk opened. And I waited to see it until I'd finished my film. Went and saw it and was bowled over by it. I was so impressed, and I think it's a majestic piece of work. And the fact that we're even in the same conversation as that movie makes me very proud.
I have 4 quick questions for
Okay.
you. First, best, last, worst. The first piece you ever directed, what and where was it?
It was a study of some daffodils in St James's Park when I was about 7 on a Super 8 camera.
That's wonderful. Best line of dialogue from Darkest Hour?
Tell the Lord Privy Seal I am sealed in the privy and can only deal with one shit at a time. I like that one.
I do too. Yeah. Last time you saw Gary Oldman, and how was he looking?
About an hour ago, and he was looking gallant.
Worst filmmaking mistake and what you learned from it?
It's too shameful. I can't tell
Maybe
you the
second
real
worst?
one. Maybe second worst. I guess forgetting that it's probably best to start with the wide shot.
Joe Wright, the movie is The Darkest Hour, and we will let you go to your premiere now.
Thank you. I'm
Very
excited.
nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.